Today, on September 3rd, a military parade is taking place in Beijing, and on the podium we see three dictators, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un. And this is exactly what the axis of Washington's opponents looks like. Against this backdrop, Donald Trump posts his trademark mockery on Truth Social. Yes, quote, "Please, Xi Jinping, send my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un while you plot against the United States of America." The wording is harsh, but frames the picture as 3 versus 1 on the day when China once again showcased its hard power in the square. The Kremlin is already insisting they're not plotting any schemes against the United States. They say you completely misunderstood everything. Let's take a look together at what happened today at the parade, the military parade in Beijing, and how the trio of Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim Jong-un are acting against the United States of America. And how can Donald Trump respond to all of this? My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is September 3rd. Let's figure it out together. But before we begin, I want to remind you that this YouTube channel releases 4-5 news stories every day with in-depth analysis of current events. So that you stay informed about everything happening in the world, make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this episode. So today in Beijing they showed what China wants to use to intimidate, not with pomp, but with the range of their strikes and their delivery systems. The Chinese press and Bloomberg compiled a list of the equipment that rolled through the square in Beijing today, with specific highlights. Well, for example, there was the newest Zhulang, 3 submarine-launched ballistic missile for strategic missile carriers. This is a bet on underwater strikes with intercontinental range. Next, updated versions of the Dongfeng 31 family of land-based ICBMs were presented. These are new large long-range missiles. Moreover, the South China Morning Post specifically mentions the Dongfeng 61 designation. There are also IJ-21 supersonic anti-ship missiles, large marine autonomous vehicles, large underwater drones, and a block of laser systems as a cheap force against mass drone launches. For television, it's an intimidating image and show. Great power, many missiles, troops on the square, meant to make the whole world afraid. But for the planners of the North Atlantic Alliance, it's all about the tables of guidance channel ranges and, most importantly, the pace of industrial production. This ensures NATO clearly understands what they may face. The key message of today's parade in Beijing was not sounded by the orchestra's trumpet, but came from the lips of Xi Jinping. The military equipment display and troop march are interesting, but the main message came from China's leader. He set the framework in such a way that it's either peace or war. And he did this demonstratively, standing between Putin and Kim Jong-un, showing who he would join if it came to fighting against the West. Today, Reuters delivered this message as directly as possible. Quote, 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 "Jinping warned the world faces a choice between peace or war during China's largest military parade, with Putin and Kim Jong-un at his side." Well, let me translate that from diplomatic language to plain language. Beijing is showing that it is ready to be a center of gravity for everyone who is dissatisfied with the Western security architecture, hegemony, and political system. And it's doing this in a setting where 2 leaders who directly support Russia's war are standing next to it. This is not a coincidence. It's a carefully staged scene meant to show that here is the polar opposite to the West, and this is what the axis of resistance to the West looks like. In the center is Xi Jinping. On the sides are the balding dictator, Putin, and Kim Jong-un. Next, a bit of politics without makeup, as they say. Putin and Kim Jong-un held separate talks in Beijing. There wasn't, anything between the lines. Quote, and again, Reuters literally reports how Putin thanked the Democratic People's Republic of Korea for its valiant help to Russia in the war against Ukraine. In response, Kim promised to help however he could. Plus, Putin stated that the deployment of North Korean troops to the Kursk region was entirely Kim Jong-un's own initiative. Well, and Putin couldn't refuse him.
I want to note that your soldiers fought bravely and heroically. I want to emphasize that we will never forget the sacrifices made by your armed forces and the families of your servicemen. On behalf of the Russian people, I want to thank you for your participation in the joint fight against modern neo-Nazism.
In the same news segment, the Kremlin confirms the invitation of Kim Jong-un to Russia, and, well, pay attention to the details. The word valiant, valiant help from the North Koreans to Russia is not just, a slip of the tongue. It's a public admission that North Korean shells and missiles are a systemic part of the Russian military economy. Now, Moscow openly displays this in Beijing for the world to see. That's it. Moscow openly admits North Korea is fighting alongside it, supplying shells, missiles, and more. Let me remind you once again, for the brainwashed, unwashed Russians, that your bald dictator Vladimir Putin claimed, "No, what are you talking about? North Korea isn't supplying us with anything, no missiles, no shells." When Ukrainian intelligence reported North Korean soldiers fighting in the Kursk region, Putin denied it, saying, "No, what are you talking about? What North Korean soldiers? We have the world's most powerful army and need no help." Ukrainians have long considered Russians unwashed. It's always a lie. It's always an attempt to deceive everyone around, including the Russians themselves. For Kyiv and Brussels, this is still a useful quote for the dossier. When the strengthening of control over components and logistics between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Russian Federation is being discussed, you kind of have an official bridge to the sanctions mechanism. Let's return to Donald Trump and his post asking for a greeting while plotting a conspiracy against the United States. Again, this isn't just a flash of temper. This is how the White House frames an image that's dangerous for the American audience. A historic parade, a military parade where allies in arms stand shoulder to shoulder. Let me remind you that Trump was supposedly also invited to this parade, but Trump didn't want to fly there. Now, the American press is siding with Donald Trump. His favorite paper, the New York Post, publishes a headline directly accusing collusion. Indian and Middle Eastern news outlets are repeating these quotes, but the Kremlin, as expected, is brushing it off. They say they're not plotting anything against the United States, and today Ushakov, Putin's aide, came out and said, "No, you misunderstood us. We're all for a multipolar world. So Putin can be with Xi Jinping, with Kim Jong-un, with Donald Trump, and really with anyone, because we support a multipolar world." Here, I'll add an interesting thought, because Xi Jinping articulates that he supports a multipolar world. Putin echoes him, very pleased, saying, "Yes, that's great. A multipolar world would end United States hegemony, but Xi Jinping actually prefers a bipolar world, not multipolarity." There is no pole for Moscow there. There are only two orbits, the United States of America and China. Xi Jinping is currently striving for this. If you look at the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine, you will see that very same bipolar world right now. Where there is Ukraine, on whose side are the West, the United States of America, Europe, and so on and so on. And there is unwashed Russia, on whose side are China, North Korea, partially India, Iran, and so on. This is a bipolar world. And when Xi Jinping stands at the parade today and keeps Putin's dogs and Kim Jong-un close by, he shows that he is at the center of this pole. Of course, there will be no multipolar world. But the very fact of the simultaneous appearance of this trio, Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un, on the Chinese stage is a perfect reason for Washington to intensify its pressure. Sanctions for North Korean supplies, export controls on Chinese dual-use components, and insurance restrictions for Russian logistical intermediaries. These are third countries that are helping Russia. In other words, Trump is playing a familiar game. It's like name who's to blame, name who's plotting against the United States of America, and then finish them off with regulations. What exactly did Kitay want to say with that iron on the square? Julang 3. That's about a second strike with intercontinental missiles underwater. You're declaring your readiness to keep the United States of America within range even in the event of a conflict around Taiwan. The new versions of the Dongfeng 31 missiles are about the mobility and survivability of ground forces. The package, these lasers plus cheap drone interceptors, this is about the economics of air defense. You don't necessarily have to shoot down swarms of drones with expensive means. You can use a penny to burn out the sensors and optics of these drones. Maritime autonomous vehicles focus on reconnaissance and mine countermeasures in gray operations. And here, Bloomberg emphasizes that China carefully disguised the equipment so that it was visible to television cameras. This is targeted communication to the outside world. Look, count, and draw your own conclusions. And the behind-the-scenes message to Washington and its allies in Asia is that we're not afraid to show the range of our weaponry next to Putin and Kim Jong-un. Now, diplomatic choreography, because it's no less important than missiles. Why am I using the word choreography here? Donald Trump often says it takes two to tango, so this is diplomatic choreography. Who arrived? Half of Eurasia and the global south. Ilham Aliyev, Lukashenko, Pashinyan, the presidents of Iran and Vietnam, the king of Cambodia, and the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Serbia, Slovakia, and more came to see Xi Jinping. In total, there are more than 25 guests at the level of heads of state and government. For Beijing, this serves two purposes: outwardly celebrating World War II victory and internally displaying loyalty to the Chinese post-Western model. And one more detail: Western leaders, to put it mildly, were in no hurry. As a result, the picture turned out to be as contrasting as possible. And this contrast is exactly what China is playing on. Again, let me repeat, we're talking about a bipolar world. Of course, this showcase also has a flip side. The camera loves bright intercontinental ballistic missiles, but reality doesn't. It's actually the cheap, mass-produced things that are causing concern in Western headquarters. These interceptor drones, underwater unmanned vehicles, long-range lasers, what they call anti-ship weapons, and so on. In other words, inexpensive weapons that can seriously disrupt warfare. This is a direct response to the mosaic of modern wars. It's not just one big missile, it's a dense mix of sensors, jammers, carriers, and more. And yes, in this sense, Kitay is nodding affirmatively to Russia, as if to say, we've taken your experience in Ukraine into account. Otherwise, such points wouldn't be highlighted in front of television cameras. That's why it's logical for Washington and the European Union to speed up bans on the supply of dual-use electronics to the Russian Federation through Chinese resellers, and to ramp up the search for mobile phones, the shadow fleet, and insurance. Because these so-called pillars are exactly what support the logistics of a relatively cheap war. What does all this mean for Ukraine? Well, nothing mystical right now, but a lot of practical things. And the first public thank you to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea for their help from dictator Putin. This is basically a gift for advocating new sanctions along the Russia-North Korea line. From shells to missile components, everything. Well, I don't know who in the West will be able to dodge and say that, well, it's not all that clear-cut. Putin directly says to Kim Jong-un, thank you helped us. And the more this thank you gets quoted, the easier it is in Brussels to push through secondary sanctions and shut down the schemes. Second, the parade will accelerate talks on the European mission in Ukraine. After images of Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim Jong-un, let's wait a little longer, supporters have fewer arguments. Third, the talk about Chinese lasers and mass drone interceptors. This is a direct hint for Kyiv and its partners. Saturating the front with cheap electronic warfare equipment and the so-called energy capacity of air defense systems, these are all more important than rare, expensive missiles. Beijing is confirming this trend today. Now, about the United States. Donald Trump's statement isn't just an emotional outburst for likes, it's steering the media agenda. He is literally incorporating this parade in Beijing into his own narrative. China is rewriting history, Russia continues the war, and North Korea aids Moscow. We need a strong economy and a robust defense ceiling. A logical consequence is a new round of pressure on Chinese supply chains, where Russia is the beneficiary. And at the same time, public shaming for those in Europe who are eyeing negotiations with absolutely no teeth and on reaching some kind of peace agreement with the Russians, which looks more like a capitulation. Against this background, any soft framework for Ukraine will look even more naive. And yes, this is the historical shell that Beijing used to cover this military parade in Beijing. The official reason is the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. In China, they like to present it as if Beijing and Moscow were the strongholds of the fight and brought the decisive victory in World War II. American media, of course, are already responding that the United States' contribution to the defeat of Japan is not just, some kind of help. It's a major part of history. Attempts to rewrite it for current politics seem too obvious. For the global audience, this is a signal. The parade is not about memory, the parade is about the future, where China wants to be the director. And in this future, Beijing is showing who it is ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with on the podium. Let me sum it up. The parade gave us 3 key points. The first is the hardware. Julang, 3 upgraded Dongfang, 31 missiles long-range anti-drone systems, underwater drones, lasers, and so on. China is investing in range and scale, not just expensive items. The second point is political. This shot of Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim Jong-un is not just a random photo. It's an invitation to a new arrangement where Beijing wants to play the leading role. In other words, it's a new group where Beijing is in charge. And the third point is about sanctions. This is an open thank you from Putin to Kim Jong-un. This is a working argument for new restrictions. Therefore, it is necessary to continue squeezing Russian logistics, to close Chinese black windows, gray schemes for transferring dual-use components, and to help Ukraine saturate the front with cheap defense. We can't ignore air defense and electronic warfare. And yes, don't overestimate television either. Because parades are won by the camera crew, but wars are won by engineers and accountants. And today it was plain to see. That's why today it became clear that Xi Jinping is striving for a bipolar world. Putin naively believes he's being invited into a multipolar world where he'll have influence. He'll have no influence. Just imagine the picture for Xi Jinping. For him, Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin are the same thing. They're just plebeians to be used. I'll leave it at that. Friends, let me remind you that on this channel there are 5 news analysis segments like this every day. So be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all the news. And write your opinions and conclusions about today's parade in Beijing in the comments. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.